Hi everyone! Thank you for joining us on another episode of Remarkable Spirit Memories of a Medium. My name is Gabrielle Gardner and I am a medium. This means that I see, feel, and hear the souls of those who are no longer residing in a physical body, or in more traditional terms, they have died. Death, as I have come to know it, most definitely is not the end. It is simply the turning of a page after completing a chapter. Today I will be sharing an experience that I had with a woman who is absolutely remarkable. But the way in which she communicated with me and the experiences we shared together during her transition to the place after this place are where this experience gets truly special. This case has some of the most validating experiences that I have had to date with spirit. I will be showing you some images later in this episode that gave me all the proof that I will ever need that this is real. Truly undeniable. This case was so full of synchronicities, facts that were able to be verified and proven, and physical evidence of spirit, and this woman gave me the go-ahead to share it all with you. Now, for the sake of privacy, I have changed her name to Sandy. In life, Sandy was so kind and always said things like, "Well, I don't know what it is, but I know there's something bigger out there. And I know we don't just go away." Those were her words, and she was so palpably strong in spirit that when I first met her, she absolutely proved her own point. Part of the role of a medium is to convey messages from loved ones in spirit, ancestors, and guides to help assure you that death is not the end, and to show you that our loved ones in spirit can and do continue to visit us at times. This connection with spirit is here to show us that there's so much more to this life than what we can see with our eyes. And this case did all of that. So sit back and listen, and if you can, send a little thank you to Sandy for giving us all some of the clearest evidence of the afterlife and spirit communication that I have ever seen. Again, I will be reading from my journal where I record all of my experiences with spirit. So, this is about my time with Sandy. In early August, I was on the way home from dinner with my parents around 9 p.m. As I have said before, I often pick up souls who are in the in-between space while in the car, which is why I don't drive very much anymore. And please check out the first few episodes of Season 1 to hear more about the in-between space. So while sitting in the back seat, I was suddenly overcome by the energy of a bad death. These are just what I call the deaths that are sudden, violent, and traumatic, and are the source of a soul temporarily being in the in-between. I could tell that the energy I was feeling was that of a woman. I could feel that she had died recently, and it was very unexpected and violent. More than most, I began to get a clear image of her face. I could see that she was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. She had dark, thick, black eyeliner. Her cheekbones were high, and her cheeks were a bit sunken. I could see that her teeth were a little messed up, and she had dark brown hair. Her eyes were kind, and her energy was gentle. I could feel the impression of drug use deep in her energy, which meant she had been a long-time user. That's just an energy signature within souls that I have encountered enough now I recognize. So suddenly I felt a pain at the back of my neck where the shoulder meets. It was right here. And then I felt the distinct impression of a blade entering my chest. As it did, the blade hit my rib bone. I suddenly knew that this very physical impression was what Sandy was stuck on in her death trauma. The impression of the knife entering her chest and the blade hitting the bone. Then I felt a second stab just below the first. And as soon as I saw and felt this stabbing, I could feel that it was getting caught in my energy. I couldn't release the feeling of the blade hitting the bone, and that's what she was also stuck on. I didn't experience it as pain, but it still felt like a energetic violation, and the sensation of something inside hitting the bone made me, cringe and feel nauseous. My chest flushed with heat, and a red rash was visible, something that is common when I'm working with spirit, but this time it didn't go away right away. I told my guides that I needed them to help me balance the energy, but I could feel that I had already accidentally taken too much of it in. I told Sandy that I was sorry, but I needed some time before I could help her. She was so kind and easygoing, and she immediately took a step back energetically. She hadn't intentionally made me feel this way, not at all. It was just that her death was still visceral in her energy because it was so recent, and I accidentally let it too far in. So by the time we got home, I was stuck on the visions of the knife in my chest, and I was feeling what Sandy had felt energetically. I began doing breath work and stretching and meditating and trying to relax and release the energy, but it wasn't happening. It was difficult. And after about an hour, the vision it subsided, my energy felt lighter, the anxiety dropped, and the feelings in my chest just became a mild ache, discomfort. So over the course of the next 3 days, Sandy came into our home nightly. She was an absolute brilliant communicator in spirit, and I quickly learned that she had been a mother of 2. She had a very hard life with a rough upbringing, riddled with abuse, and from her teens on, she had battled addiction. Life had been hard for her from the beginning, but she never let it make her hard. She was so kind. She was the kind of person who would talk to anyone with genuine openness and caring. She cared for many on the streets as she was sporadically homeless herself. She had finally, in the last couple years, in her words, gotten my act together enough to be something like a mom to my 2 babies. Her kids had been living with other family for most of their lives, but she had always shown them nothing but love when she saw them. So over those 3 days, I got to know Sandy as, she was a warm, funny woman. She had a deep smoker's voice, but, I think I would have enjoyed sitting down next to her in a bar. And she came in when I wasn't expecting it, usually when I was just doing things around the house. She never asked for anything. She was never creepy or looming. She always just seemed to want to be casually social. And I think this is what she was like in body. On the 3rd night, while I was in the kitchen, I was loading the dishwasher, I felt her come in by the kitchen sink. And I asked her if she could see her guides, and she turned away from me. She said I thought that I would have time to make it up to them. I knew that she was talking about her kids, and I said, "I'm sorry, I know that you did." She put her hand to her chest and said I should have had time. I said, "Yeah, you should have." At that point, I felt the impression of the blade hitting the bone again, and I knew that she was getting pulled back into that memory too. I said, you can find your guides and go with them, or your family. She turned around quickly and said, "I don't want to see them," and then she was gone. That was the first time that she had given me anything like a sharp response or anger, and I could feel that it was coming from heart pain. The guide showed me that Sandy's dad had been a mean drunk who went to jail when she was very young, and her mom had chosen boyfriends over Sandy throughout her life, and some of those boyfriends had been cruel. They showed me that Sandy, around 13 years old, had run away from home to escape abuse, and that was when drugs had entered her life. And with this download from the guides, I better understood Sandy's hesitation. Not only was she temporarily caught on the sudden traumatic death, but she didn't want to see her abusers who had died before her. She didn't want to see her family or many others who had been cruel to her during her life. I knew I could talk with Sandy and bring in the guides to show her that it's always her choice of who she would like to see. But she still needed a bit more time to move the stabbing trauma. On the 4th day since meeting her, I began to feel unwell as a reaction to the energetic imprint of Sandy's death. But an acupuncture appointment helped to vent it out temporarily, and it released some of that energy from my chest. Unfortunately, timing wasn't on our side, and I had to leave for a 4-day camping trip that afternoon. On both of the 2-hour drives to the family campout and back, my body felt like it was replaying Sandy's death. And I did everything that I knew how to do to release it, but I couldn't. I just couldn't, and it felt like it was sinking deeper into my body. And as I've said in earlier episodes, spirit work can really affect the body when the connection or energetic imprint is strong. So it's really important that you do as much as you can to take care of all 3 of the pillars of you, which are the mind, body, and soul. The day we returned home from the campout, I began to feel extremely sick, with extreme fatigue and a bone-deep exhaustion. Now, I want to clarify again that this had nothing to do with Sandy. She was in no way doing this. She wasn't making it happen. She wasn't making me feel sick. It was just that my body had accidentally, upon meeting her that first night, taken on too much of that death trauma energy. So that night when I got home from the camp out, I was sitting on the couch watching TV, and she came in, and we actually sat down and had probably the longest conversation I've ever had with one of these souls. And I said, you know, you don't need to see anyone that you don't want to see. And you get to choose where you go to heal. That's what the guides show. She listened, and I felt her energy becoming lighter as we talked. And we just sat there watching TV together for a few minutes. And then she said, I think I'm ready now. I felt the guide's energy swell. It got bigger. The guide's energy just gets bigger. It fills a room when these souls in the in-between decide that they are ready to go, because it always has to be their decision, so that's a moment to be celebrated. And I told her that I needed to rest that night because I was not feeling great, but I'd be ready to do it in the morning. And as soon as she had told me that she was ready, I felt the energy in my own body begin to shift too. And it was like something in my chest, began to cramp, and I was continually stretching it throughout the night, and it was like my body just knew that it was time to release it too. So that next morning, I woke up feeling very tired and anxious, but ready to do the crossing ceremony with the guides. And I left my bedroom after meditating, and I could feel that the dining room was already full of Sandy's guides. And again, there was this air of excitement for her. It's like the energy that you feel when people are getting ready for a party. And I set up the space with sunflower seeds, which were one of her favorite snacks, as she told me. And I felt her sit down in the chair. And I could see that she was holding her hands over where she had been stabbed. I could feel that she was getting lost in the memory of the knife blade hitting her bone again. And I said, Sandy, what is your favorite place in the world? She looked at me and smiled and said, the beach. I love the beach. And I said, the way that this works is that you get to choose what it looks like. You get to choose what it feels like. You get to choose what makes you happiest. And she laughed with the deep smoker's voice, and she said, well, damn, that sounds even better than a dream. I said, it is. I began to lay out the grid with my guides as we talked, and Sandy said, I won't get to watch them grow up. And I said, but you do. The guides have shown that you do. They show this over and over, that it's different than being there with them. But you see it. And so after about 20 minutes of going through the process of setting up this grid, I got to a certain point that's for healing of the physical body of the vessel. And I saw her begin to rock back and forth slightly, and you could just tell she was filled with anxiety. And I felt my anxiety rising along with her, and a really uncomfortable heat in my chest. And I knew that the stabbing trauma was being moved and shifted by the guides. And I looked down at my own chest, and I saw 2 red welts rising. And I knew that this was my body releasing the energy that it had picked up and stored for the past 9 days. Again, I was shocked by the physical realness of this, but I immediately began to feel all of the sick feelings and the energy, the drained energy that I had. It started to lift, and I immediately started to feel better. And it was as this energy was leaving my body. So Sandy stood up, and she came over to the grid and stood there looking at it. And she said, these are her words, she said, hey, that's really beautiful, isn't it? I said, it is. These also mirror the energy of your soul. She looked at me shocked then and said, wow, that's... She said, that's better than I ever thought my soul could be. I said, Sandy, is there anyone that you would like to see when you get there? Because they'll be waiting for you. She got tears in her eyes and looked down. And she said, Teddy. She whispered the name Teddy. And then she said, I didn't do right by him either. Suddenly the guide showed me in a download series of images of Sandy in it looked like a dirty, dingy apartment, passed out on a couch. But next to her was this tabby cat with dark fur. And they then showed me, this stop motion style of images of Sandy kind of losing the battle with her addiction temporarily, and she went on a bender and she lost this apartment, and in that mix Teddy had been lost and eventually he had been euthanized. And I came back to the present and saw this. Came back to the present and I saw that Sandy was crying, and she said I should have loved him better too. I felt the guides opening up the path of light for Sandy. And I said, look over there. This was one of the few times that the guides let me see the other side. And there, sitting in the white sand on the beach that Sandy had picked, next to a reclined beach chair, was Teddy. And you guys, this stuff is really beautiful. It is. And Sandy let out a happy sob, and she looked at Teddy sitting there. And then she looked at me and she said, thank you. And she walked off into that light and that space. And as she did, all of my feelings of illness that I'd had and exhaustion and everything were gone just immediately. And usually I don't get to see someone after they have crossed in these healing ceremonies, but the guide showed me Sandy walking there, and she picked up and cradled Teddy. And then they just laid down there on that recliner in the beach chair. And, they just laid there to rest. And it was like she was doing a little bit more healing there. And Teddy crawled up on her chest, and he curled up right where she had been stabbed. And his sweet little soul was helping her heal too. Sandy had found the place that she was meant to be. And it was beautiful, and it was full of peace, and it was full of happiness, and it was all the things that we hope it is, So my experience with Sandy was truly remarkable in so many ways. During her crossing and healing ceremony, my body was able to release and vent out this energy of her death imprint that it had been storing for 9 days, and this was the most physical manifestation of a spiritual energy that I've ever seen. It's important to remember that Sandy had nothing to do with this. It was just that my body had picked it up and it had to release it in its own way. And the trauma of the stabbing that she had held, my body mirrored. This is something that happens occasionally, and it just had to filter itself out in its own way. And letting it go that way is actually more healthy than not coming out. I know that sometimes this can look scary, but if I kept this in, what can happen for some spirit workers is they hold that energy in, and then it ends up turning into like a long-term illness or a serious illness down the road. So we must always release that energy that we take on from others. So the other remarkable thing is that the entire experience that I had with Sandy had been done without actually knowing who she was. Or where she had lived. And about a week after her crossing ceremony, I saw a news article. I saw the news article about her. It was about a local woman who had been murdered earlier in the month. And when I opened it, I was shocked to see, first I was shocked to see Sandy. I saw her just as I had seen her in spirit, and that was incredible for me to see it that way, and that was the first verifiable detail. And it was truly just surreal to see this woman that I'd seen only in spirit. And the other neat thing was that I had made all of these notes about my experience with Sandy, including her description and her family and how she had passed, in a time-stamped file, and it was made before the article was ever published. So again, it's just this. She gave us so much evidence of spirit in the afterlife. And the article had a picture of her with her 2 young children, and I could just feel, when I looked at that, I felt her energy was healing, in her connection with her children. And it also described her battle with addiction, and I felt none of that energy remaining whatsoever. She had completely let that go at the moment that she had crossed. The most shocking part of the article was that it briefly described her murder, which had taken place just hours before I picked up her energy. So that was shocking as well, because I truly don't think that it's common that I meet these souls in the in-between space that soon after. Based on what the article shared, I had ended up picking up Sandy approximately 8 hours after she had passed, you know, on that night that I met her when I was on the way home from dinner with my parents. And it went on to say that she had been randomly targeted by a woman who was in a mental health crisis and delusional. And she had stabbed Sandy in the back of her neck and then twice in her chest. And, you know, bystanders had tried to help, but they weren't able to stop the bleeding. And Sandy had died just 8 miles from where I picked her up. So again, I don't understand necessarily where these souls are coming from when I pick them up. So that was fascinating to me to hear that she was so close and had passed so recently. Again, everything that Sandy had shown me in spirit was verified by this news report, and that was surreal. So I'm sharing this again with Sandy's permission. I'm sharing all this to help you understand how real this is, how real your connections are to your loved ones in spirit. You know, that there's just so much more to this life than what we can see with our eyes. And Sandy gave us so much evidence of that and of the powerful healing that takes place. She did so much to help show us that the energy of spirit is palpable and real, and that the place after this place is full of incredible beauty and warmth and peace and love. So Sandy was and is remarkable. If you feel inclined, you can send her a little thank you for showing us so much of the beauty of spirit and the place after this place. I know that she had a part in letting me, and hopefully you can see through this experience as well, some of that afterlife place, and it is just extraordinarily beautiful. I truly appreciate you taking the time to hear about Sandy's experience, and I hope that her remarkable energy, along with Teddy's sweet soul, helps you understand that our loved ones on the other side are waiting for us when it is our time. So you may have noticed throughout this episode that I do actually still have some marks here. These are the 2 marks that came up when I was doing the crossing ceremony for Sandy. And they came up, like I said, as welts, and then they actually it felt like heat was radiating out of them. It felt like my body was releasing a tremendous amount of energy, and it was buzzy and tingly, and then it felt like, yeah, so much heat was coming out, and then they did open up a little bit, and so they never really bled, but it did scab, and so we're about a month and a half out from that. So it did, they are very much a real mark, and I want to say that, it was nothing done to me. So all of this was coming from the inside out. This was my body venting out this energy that it had taken on. And so it wasn't like, these aren't necessarily real, stab marks. This is just, there was an energetic imprint in Sandy that my body mirrored when I connected with her, and it released that energy and had to vent it out that day that I did the crossing. And again, where this is, and I've had acupuncture appointments since, you can actually see we continue doing these appointments around it to try to release it, and that's a bruise where I have blood stagnation, which sounds scarier than it is. It's just that it goes to that source to heal it, to that place in your body to heal it. And so I'm happy that it vented out the way that it did, because I know had it stayed in here, it would have eventually for sure made me sick. And I've learned too that as I was growing up, I was sick all the time. And I think that this is why. This showed me that. So as I was young, I would pick up this energy from people who had died in traumatic deaths, and my body would take some of that on and then not release it. And I was sick all the time as a child with, unexplainable illnesses and crazy fatigue all the time. And so this, I'm actually happy. My body is doing what it's supposed to do, and it released it, and I feel better, right? I feel great. It looks a little scary sometimes, but I feel fantastic, whereas I felt terrible when my body didn't know how to let it out. So, my name is Gabrielle Gardner, and this has been another episode of Remarkable Spirit. Please join us again next time to see how Remarkable Spirit is all around us.